In addition to my rather technically oriented videos dedicated to the piano efficiency and targeted tutorials dedicated to certain pieces, I would like to record a series of videos about the art of interpretation, because it doesn't matter how flawless your technique is, it's very important to be able to communicate via your performances with your listeners and with yourself as well. So today we are going to speak about fundamentals of interpretations. Of course, this is a vast topic and many books, many dissertations are written on that topic. But today we are going to speak about basic stuff which is applicable everywhere. And unfortunately, which not always taught even in professional conservatories. And unfortunately, many students are not actually kind of actively aware of these concepts, which I'm going to cover today. The Western musical tradition is all about creating a tension and releasing it. And if you understand this consciously, and if you're able to work with that, you can already go quite far in interpreting the score. Let's have a look at a very evident example like this one. So what happens here, after the first initial blow, after the first initial shock, we have a series of chords which lead us towards the diminished seventh chord. And this chord is traditionally considered to be very intensive, very tense, because it consists of two very sharp dissonances. One enlarged fourth or diminished fifth, and another one. That's why it's so crispy, so sharp to our ears. And there were even legends that noble ladies of the 17th, 18th century, they were fainting when they heard this chord in a concert, so sharp and so shocking it was. Of course, I think that's an artistic exaggeration, but I read actually such stories in some music books. That's why this chord needs to be released. And this is exactly what happens here. And in order to make this chord even more tense, Beethoven introduces actually another sharp interval in the bass voice, C, F sharp. That's why after this chord we have to play the resolution chord softer, although the fact that this is actually dominant. It's a very strong harmony, actually. But in this context, it should be weaker, because this chord, this monstrosity, is even more tense. And this is why this music works on us in such a powerful way. Because we have tension, release, silence. And this relation between a tense chord, release, and silence, tension, release, silence, this works in a very hypnotic, in a very enigmatic way. And just compare how more primitive it would sound if we would always stay at the same level of tension. If you would create something like that, for example, transferring from one diminished seventh chord to another one and staying at the same level, it's kind of intensive, but it doesn't work so deeply psychologically on us, because the level of the tension is always the same. But by contraposing different levels of tension, Beethoven creates a truly interesting, truly amazing effect on us, on our emotional state. And the task of a performer is to be able to notice such tensions and to convey them accordingly. So, for example, if there is a simple chord progression of, let's say, tonic, subdominant, dominant, and tonic, your dominant chord should be always more intensive than its resolution towards tonic. Like, for example, in this waltz by Frédéric Chopin. So, as you see, when we get to the dominant bar, the music expands, the melody leaps further, and it sounds more opened than its resolution. That's why the E major bar will be more intensive than the next A minor bar, because A minor is technically is a resolution of our dominant. And even further, even if I choose to wrap up the music at the end of the piece and to play the last two bars softer, this harmony should be a little bit tiny bit more intensive, more loud than its resolution to tonic, because this is our dominant chord, which is also a ninth chord, not even seventh, but a ninth chord. And it has a very tender, very delicate resolution, and this is one of the most evident signs of a professional musician, being able to react on such things and operate with them. Of course, tension in music might be not only in harmony, it might be in melody. For example, like in this famous Bach's piece. So what happens here actually? We don't have just a series of notes. We have 3 leaps. Each of them is wider than the previous one. There's a small distance of a third. There's a fifth up and pum. And the last one is even more excited. That's why the question which a performer asks themselves is, how do I react on that? How do I interpret it? Should I increase dynamics with each leap? Should I use some rubato in order to transmit the intensity of the last final leap? Which would be actually quite close to the Baroque style, because Baroque style was very much about articulating smaller motifs and working with tensions between sounds actually. So imagine that between that F and F, there is a magnetic tension, like when you place 2 magnets facing the same pole to each other, plus and plus, and you can't really connect them because there is a magnetic tension between them, so they kind of resist that connection. And this is exactly what happens in music all the time. So I always get inspired by let's say physics, actually, about gravity theories and stuff, because I feel that in music it makes actually as much sense when you have a 10th leap. You should actually react on that somehow, and that implies rubato quite often. So again, such topic as rubato, it's a very complex, very important topic. How to use additional time, whether to use it at all and stuff, it depends very much on how you perceive musical tensions, as well as dynamics. Also depends very much on that, whether we make crescendo when we want to transmit the rising tension, or when we want to make diminuendo because tension fades. So all these things actually derive from this ability to notice tensions in music. And the simple reason to understand a concept is also paying attention to augmented pitches, to some irregular pitches. For example, if you have a C major scale, the tension grows very steadily, like nothing extraordinary happens. But if you suddenly have F sharp, it's an event on which you have to react somehow, yeah, because this is an irregular pitch in C minor. Or, for example, if you have a wide melodic leap, and especially if the interval is sharp, like, for example, major sevenths, this is a very tense interval. So if your melody leaps 1 major seventh up, this is a major event which you have to react on somehow. And funnily enough, its opposite, minor second, is S tense. So you can also quite easily understand the scale of a musician by just listening how they work with this interval, whether they are able to play it in a sensitive, careful way, or whether they just kind of pass by, not even noticing these tensions. And Chopin in general was a master of melodic tension, and especially he was a master of using chromatic lines and minor seconds engraved into his melodies in order to increase amount of tension. Like, for example, in this beautiful impromptu number 3, which I plan to also cover in more detail on this channel. And just listen at this beauty. And here we have a first chromatic addendum, let's say. So just compare how normally it would sound if we would have a line like absolutely like ordinary, let's say, but adding just a small tiny chromatic step. And here comes another one, a very sweet resolution. And as if this wouldn't be enough, Chopin adds immediately another one. So it's incredibly chromatic, and that's why, of course, you have to react on it somehow. Of course, you want to do rubato for each minor second. That would be silly and, of course, too much. But there is a question like, how much is too much? And definitely you can't just pass by, like not reacting on them. And you have to work with it as a performer. So this is one of the challenges about performing. First, being informed about this concept, about these melodic and harmonic tensions, and secondly, work how to convey them adequately, so it would not be too much, but at the same time expressive enough in order to transmit that emotion, to open up the potential of music. But here I would like to give you a small warning, because if you are among sensitive and passionate musicians who let everything flow through their hearts, if you intensively feel the expressiveness of music or have developed this skill through passionate practice, and yes, actually it's a developable skill, so it's not obviously an inborn quality. You can well develop this sensitivity, let's say, towards musical material, but if that's the case, you have to also develop a good skill of separating musical tension and bodily tension, because quite often we build a bodily tension in response to the expressiveness in music. And I regularly deal with students who are very gifted actually, but they don't know how to separate these two different tensions. So they end up playing very incredibly tense, kind of like squeezing music out of the keyboard, and as a result, nobody actually sees that they are gifted. So even if you play something very challenging, approaching a climax, for example, in music, you should be able to find spots where you would actually release your body, like for example in this spot. And so between that passage, I would quickly release my hands before approaching the climax. Otherwise, I get this kind of static tension, which doesn't benefit my performance, but rather ruins it. That's why, speaking about piano learners, piano students, I could classify people into three major categories, let's say. The first category is quite rare, and those are students who are intuitively good in feeling and adequately transmitting musical tension. So, for example, sometimes you see kids who intuitively play piano in a very expressive way, reacting on melodic harmonic tension and at the same time not getting physical tension too much. And such people are usually considered to be like particularly gifted piano students. The second category, which is of course larger, are people who feel musical tension, who feel the expressiveness of music, but don't know how to transmit these tensions. And often they accumulate a huge amount of bodily tension. And this is quite dangerous because it leads to a wrong path, basically. And I had a student who was exactly like that. And many teachers actually considered her to be not really worth of spending their time on, because she was playing with a huge amount of tension and it was a mess. But after we have started working, we were able to separate like what she wants to convey with her music and the way she does it, like bodily. And just in a few months, she actually transformed her playing to such a degree that she even was able to win a few competitions. And the third category are people who don't really feel those musical tensions because most probably they were not like introduced to this concept, like what means to play an instrument expressively. So they don't actually have a need of transmitting them. And this is exactly what happens when you listen to a player who, as people say, like he plays without a soul, he plays mechanically. This is when we feel that a person just goes by. So, for example, in case of Chopin's impromptu, that would be something like... If you hear something like that, you might say, oh yeah, he plays mechanically. It's like, okay, it's not very expressive. This happens because I didn't react on all these beautiful chromatic... Or, for example, such spot, it needs some additional time, otherwise it might sound too mechanical if I just go pass by. Of course, these are subjects to debates, and people constantly fight about whether this is too much rubato, whether this is too little rubato. No, you have to play it like this, no, you have to play it like that. But the fact is that we have to react on a musical material somehow. But summing up my very subjective classification of piano learners, I would add that if a piano learner is passionate enough about music, and if they were lucky with a teacher who would work on both technique efficiency and musical meaning, musical expressiveness, after a substantial training period, you can't really say to which group a piano student belonged initially. Were they intuitively good with playing expressively, or they learned how to play expressively? That's why I'm quite reluctant to divide people on talented students and everyone else, because in my opinion, dedication, patience and passion might change quite a lot. So I wish you fun playing piano, and see you next time.